The rain fell softly against the large glass windows of my apartment, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets below. It was one of those evenings that made you want to stay inside, wrapped in a blanket, sipping something warm, and forgetting the world. Rufus, my cousin, was lounging on the other side of the room, headphones on, engrossed in a video game. I watched him for a moment, a mischievous thought creeping into my mind. He was so focused, so oblivious, and I realized just how tempting it could be to stir a little trouble. "Bored?" I asked lightly, leaning against the doorframe. He didn't answer immediately. He just shrugged, still fixated on the game. "Kind of," he muttered. "This level's impossible." I smirked, feeling a rush of daring energy. "Want to have a little fun?" I asked, letting my voice hold a playful lilt. He finally looked up, curiosity in his dark brown eyes. "Fun? What kind of fun?" "You'll see," I replied, trying to sound casual. My heart thumped a little faster than usual. I had no idea if he'd say yes or run, but the suspense made my pulse race. Rufus hesitated, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "All right. I'm in," he said finally. It was supposed to be harmless. A playful trick, a tease. But as I watched him stand and move closer, I realized that this game might be more dangerous than I thought, especially for my heart. I had planned the dare carefully. Nothing too bold, just enough to make him squirm and laugh. A little brush of hands here, a teasing glance there, innocent, or so I told myself. "First dare," I said, trying to sound casual as I approached him. "You have to let me tie this scarf around your eyes. Then, you have to guess what I'm holding." Rufus raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" "Yes," I said, holding back a laugh. "It's just a game. Relax." He hesitated, but the thrill of the unknown seemed to get him. Slowly, carefully, he let me wrap the scarf around his eyes. His movements were tense, his breath shallow. I could feel the heat radiating from him as he stood there, waiting. I held up a small stuffed animal, then a spoon, then something soft I had grabbed from the couch. Each time he guessed, I laughed, and he laughed too, the sound low and hesitant at first, then more relaxed. But the closer I got to him, the more dangerous the game felt. My fingers brushed his arm accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, and I felt a spark that made my chest tighten. Rufus's laughter faltered for a moment, and I realized he had noticed it too. The game had started as innocent teasing, but it quickly became more. Every touch, every glance, carried a tension neither of us had anticipated. I found myself sitting closer than necessary, leaning just a little into his space. He didn't pull away. "Your turn," he said, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Dare me back." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep the game harmless, another part, the part one couldn't ignore, wanted to push further. I leaned toward him, lowering my voice. "I dare you to trust me completely." Rufus tilted his head, puzzled. "What does that even mean?" "You'll see," I whispered, my heart racing. As he reached for my hand, the first undeniable spark passed between us, a current that made the hair on my arms stand up. I had intended this to be fun, a little game, but suddenly, it felt like the line between playful and dangerous had blurred. And I wasn't sure if I wanted it back. Rufus's hand lingered in mine, and suddenly, the world seemed to shrink to the space between us. I could feel his warmth, the subtle tremor of anticipation that mirrored my own. My heart pounded so loudly I thought he might hear it. "Are you serious about this?" he asked softly, his voice almost a whisper. I smiled, leaning closer. "Completely." He laughed nervously, the sound deep and melodic, sending a shiver down my spine. I could sense that he was aware of something shifting between us, a change neither of us could fully name. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows, masking the tension in the room. I let my hand brush his lightly, testing boundaries, seeing how far this game could go. He didn't pull away, instead, he mirrored my movements, cautious but curious. It was a delicate dance, one fueled by adrenaline and a strange intimacy that neither of us had expected. Each glance, each touch, carried weight. My playful plan had evolved into something more complicated, and the thrill terrified me just as much as it excited me. The evening stretched on, the game continuing, each dare pushing the line further. I challenged him to a truth, then a tease, and soon, laughter mixed with quiet moments of tension. Rufus's eyes lingered on me in ways that made my pulse quicken. "Why am I feeling like I shouldn't do this? But I want to," he murmured, almost to himself. I tilted my head, studying him. "Maybe, curiosity has its consequences," I teased, smiling softly. He looked at me, confusion and something deeper flashing in his gaze. I realized then that the playful tension had morphed into an unspoken attraction, something neither of us could ignore. I wanted to back away, to stop before it became too real, but part of me wanted to see how far this could go. The air in the room felt electric. Each small touch, each fleeting glance, seemed charged with possibility. I knew this game was no longer just fun, it was dangerous, but in the most exhilarating way. As the night deepened, the apartment grew quiet except for the rain. Rufus sat closer now, his hand brushing mine accidentally, or maybe deliberately. I could feel him searching for a boundary, and I realized I was doing the same. I don't know what I'm feeling," he admitted, voice low. This was supposed to be just a game. But now, his words trailed off, heavy with unsaid emotion. I swallowed hard, the air thick between us. "I know," I whispered. "I didn't mean for it to get like this either." We sat in silence for a moment, letting the tension stretch. Then, almost instinctively, we leaned toward each other. A shared understanding passed silently between us. We were standing on the edge of something thrilling, something forbidden, and neither of us wanted to retreat. It happened suddenly. A moment of daring, a leap of curiosity. My hand reached up to touch his face, and he met me halfway. The kiss was electric, soft at first, hesitant, and then more urgent, more insistent. I could feel the storm outside echoing the storm inside. Our breaths mingled, hearts racing in sync. The playful game that had begun hours ago had become an emotional wildfire, consuming caution and leaving only raw desire. When we finally pulled away, the world seemed different. The room felt smaller, more intimate. Rufus's dark eyes held mine, searching, questioning, yet full of something deeper, trust, longing, and an unspoken promise. "I didn't expect that," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Neither did I admitted, heart hammering in my chest. For the first time, I realized that some games have consequences far beyond what we anticipate, and sometimes, those consequences are exactly what we secretly desire." The morning sunlight spilled through the blinds, cutting across the living room in slanted golden lines. Rufus was still on the couch, his head resting on the armrest, staring at the ceiling. I sat nearby, pretending to scroll on my phone, but my eyes kept drifting to him. After last night, nothing felt the same. Every glance, every touch had meaning now. I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface, a quiet storm waiting to erupt. "Are we okay?" he asked suddenly, his voice low, breaking the fragile silence. I hesitated. Was it okay? We had crossed lines neither of us had expected, and yet, there was an undeniable connection that neither of us wanted to let go. "Yes," I said softly. "We're okay. I think." His hand reached for mine on instinct, and I didn't pull away. That small gesture was enough to remind us that last night had changed everything. Curiosity had consequences, and somehow, it had pulled us closer than ever. The days that followed were filled with subtle tension. We moved around each other like careful dancers, every touch and glance loaded with meaning. I caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking, and I felt my pulse quicken every time our hands brushed. One evening, as we watched a movie, my leg accidentally touched his. He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted closer, as if drawn by some magnetic force neither of us could resist. "Why do I feel like I'm walking on a tightrope?" he murmured, half to himself. "Because you are," I said, trying to sound light-hearted. "And maybe you like it." He didn't answer immediately, but the faint smile tugging at his lips told me everything. The tension was no longer playful, it was real, palpable, and dangerously addictive. One rainy afternoon, I found myself alone with Rufus in the kitchen. The sound of water pattering against the windows created a cocoon around us. "I dare you," I said suddenly, my voice low, teasing, To tell me something you've never told anyone. He hesitated, and I could see the internal battle playing out in his eyes. Finally, he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. I like you, he admitted, the words hanging in the air like a delicate thread. My heart skipped. You do? I whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Yes, he said, his hand brushing mine almost accidentally. I can't stop thinking about you. The confession sent a shiver down my spine. The playful game had evolved into something more profound, a dangerous, intoxicating desire neither of us could ignore. The next few days were a series of close calls. Every accidental touch, every lingering look, seemed to push us closer to the edge. I found myself imagining what it would be like if we didn't stop, if we surrendered to the tension that had been building for weeks. One night, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights, he leaned in just a little too close. I could feel his breath against my cheek, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. Do you ever think about us? He asked softly. Every day, I admitted. The words were barely audible, but they carried the weight of all my hidden thoughts and desires. Rufus's eyes darkened with intensity. Then why are we pretending this is just a game? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The unspoken truth hung between us, undeniable and electrifying. Curiosity had led us here, and now I was ready to push a little further. That evening, I challenged him to a dare that I knew would be risky, a test of both courage and desire. I dare you to let me kiss you again, I said, my voice trembling slightly, betraying the excitement beneath my calm exterior. His eyes widened for a moment, then softened. Are you sure? He asked, almost pleading. Yes, I whispered, leaning closer. I'm sure. The kiss that followed was different from the first, slower, deeper, and charged with emotion. It wasn't just a game anymore. It was a test of trust, a surrender to something forbidden yet irresistible. When we finally pulled away, both of us were breathless. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. Curiosity had consequences, yes, but sometimes, the consequences were far more thrilling than you could ever imagine. The following morning, the air between Rufus and me was thick with unspoken words. We moved around the apartment carefully, avoiding glances that lingered too long, yet both secretly craving the small touches that reminded us of last night. I caught him staring at me while making coffee, his eyes soft, searching. My heart fluttered, and I had to remind myself to breathe. The playful game had changed everything. We could no longer pretend that it was just fun. You're quiet today, he remarked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Plotting something, I assume? Maybe, I said with a teasing smile. Or maybe I'm just thinking about last night. He froze slightly, and I realized I'd said too much or maybe just enough. Rufus didn't reply immediately, but the way he lingered near me, the subtle brush of his shoulder, spoke louder than any words. The tension was no longer just playful, it was personal, intimate, and unavoidable. Days passed, each one blurring the line between casual affection and something more. I found myself testing boundaries, slight touches, a hand on his arm, a nudge closer than necessary. Each time, he didn't pull away. One afternoon, as we sat side by side on the couch watching a movie, our hands brushed again. He looked at me, his eyes dark with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. You know, he whispered, leaning just slightly toward me, this could get complicated. I smiled softly, my fingers brushing his. Some complications are worth it, I murmured. The playful game we had started now felt like walking a tightrope. Every move was a risk, yet every risk seemed to draw us closer together. The emotional charge between us had become impossible to ignore. One evening, the city outside glittered under the lights, and we found ourselves sitting on the balcony, wrapped in blankets. The quiet hum of cars below and the distant murmur of voices made our little corner of the world feel isolated, intimate. I have to tell you something, Rufus said, his voice low and serious. My heart skipped. What is it? He took a deep breath. I think I'm falling for you. Not just as my cousin, not as a friend, but something more. The words hit me like a wave, leaving me breathless. I wanted to deny it, to tell him it was just a game, but deep down, I knew the truth. I feel the same way, I admitted, my voice barely audible. I didn't think it could happen, but it did. We sat in silence, the confession hanging in the air, heavy and thrilling. For the first time, the game didn't matter, we were both fully aware of the emotional stakes. As our closeness grew, so did the tension. One evening, a small misunderstanding escalated into a heated argument. "Why are you acting like this?" Rufus demanded, frustration evident in his voice. "I'm not," I shot back, equally defensive. "You're overreacting." We glared at each other for a moment, the emotions raw and unfiltered. Then, almost simultaneously, we realized how ridiculous we were being. Both of us wanted connection, not conflict. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, running a hand through his hair. "Me too," I replied, taking a deep breath. "I guess we're not used to all this," I gestured between us, "this tension." We laughed softly, the tension breaking, and for a moment, the world felt calm again. Even arguments had consequences, but they didn't have to be destructive. The rain poured harder than ever that night, drumming against the windows with relentless force. We sat together on the couch, the room dimly lit by the streetlights outside. "I like being here with you," Rufus murmured, resting his head on my shoulder. I felt my chest tighten, the simplicity of the moment carrying a weight I hadn't expected. "Me too," I whispered. We stayed like that for hours, the world outside forgotten. The game that had started as playful curiosity had transformed into a deep emotional bond, one that neither of us could ignore, nor wanted to. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, a mix of excitement, longing, and unspoken promises. I realized then that curiosity had consequences, but sometimes, those consequences were worth every risk. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments that neither of us wanted to break. Rufus and I found ourselves talking more, sharing small secrets and stories that we had never told anyone else. One afternoon, we were sitting on the balcony, watching the city bustle below. I leaned slightly against him, and he didn't move away. The warmth of his shoulder pressed against mine, and the gentle brush of his hand against mine made my heart flutter. "I feel like we're closer than ever," he murmured, almost to himself. I smiled softly. "We are," I replied. "But closer doesn't mean it's easy." He looked at me, his eyes serious. "I don't care about easy. I just care about you." The words sent a thrill through me. I realized then that our little game had transformed into a bond neither of us wanted to ignore. Curiosity had led us here, but staying close was entirely our choice. One rainy evening, the apartment felt particularly cozy. We were both wrapped in blankets, sipping hot chocolate, and listening to the rain tap gently against the windows. "I have a secret," I said suddenly, glancing at him. He raised an eyebrow, curiosity sparkling in his eyes. "Oh, you finally going to tell me?" "Yes," I whispered, feeling my pulse quicken. "I think about you more than I should. Even when we're not playing any game." Rufus's lips curved into a small smile. "Good," he said softly, brushing his thumb over my hand. "Because I think about you too. Always." The simple exchange left us both quiet, yet the tension between us grew stronger, deeper. It was no longer just a game, we had crossed into something real, fragile, and thrilling. The next evening, the city was quiet, and the only light came from the soft glow of the street lamps outside. Rufus and I found ourselves alone in the living room, the atmosphere charged yet calm. "I feel like we're skating on thin ice," he admitted, sitting close. "One wrong move, and—" I interrupted him gently, placing a hand over his. "And what?" He looked into my eyes, hesitating. "And we could ruin everything, or we could make it perfect." I smiled, my heart pounding. "Then let's be careful, but see where it leads." For the rest of the night, we talked, laughed, and shared glances filled with emotion. Every word, every touch, reinforced the bond that curiosity had sparked between us. Even with all the closeness, there were moments of doubt. Rufus's occasional hesitation and my own uncertainty created a tension that neither of us could completely ignore. "I don't want to lose what we have," he admitted one evening, his voice tight with emotion. "But sometimes, I get scared." I nodded, understanding completely. "I get scared too. But fear doesn't mean we stop. It just means we're real." We held each other close, silently promising that we would navigate the unknown together. Curiosity had started as a game, but now it was a journey, a risky, thrilling journey that neither of us wanted to abandon. The apartment was quiet that night. The city lights flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the walls. Rufus and I sat together on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket, hands intertwined. "I think I'm ready," he said softly. "Ready to see where this goes, with you." I smiled, my heart racing. "Me too," I whispered. It wasn't a dramatic confession or a grand gesture. It was simple, quiet, and completely honest. The playful game, the daring dares, the teasing everything had led us here, to a point where curiosity had consequences, yes, but also rewards. We didn't know exactly what the future held. But for the first time, we weren't afraid to find out together. A few days later, Rufus and I were sitting on the balcony again, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. The night was quiet, and the air smelled faintly of rain. "I wasn't expecting any of this," he said, voice soft, almost hesitant. "I thought it would just be a silly game." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Neither did I. But maybe some games aren't meant to stay games." He looked at me, his eyes dark with unspoken feelings. For a long moment, we simply sat together, hands brushing, hearts beating faster than the rain outside. Then, slowly, he leaned closer, resting his head against mine. It was simple, intimate, and yet it spoke volumes. I realized then that sometimes the most unexpected moments hold the most truth. Curiosity had led us here, to this quiet, perfect connection, and I didn't want to let it go. The next morning brought sunlight and the reality of our closeness. Rufus and I moved carefully around each other, aware that everything between us had changed. "I guess this means we can't pretend anymore," he said quietly, sipping his coffee. "No," I admitted. "We can't. But maybe we don't have to." He smiled softly, reaching out to hold my hand. "I don't want to lose what we have." "You won't," I said, feeling the warmth of certainty. Curiosity had consequences, but some consequences are worth it. We laughed softly, the tension easing. The playful game that had started it all had taught us something important. Emotional honesty and trust were just as thrilling as any dare. Weeks passed, and our bond grew stronger. The teasing, playful moments remained, but they were now accompanied by a deeper understanding and connection. Rufus and I had learned to navigate the delicate line between curiosity and consequences, love and caution. One evening, we stood on the balcony again, looking out at the city. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. "You know," he said softly, "I wouldn't change a thing. Not the game, not the dares, not any of it." "Neither would I whispered, smiling. The rain had long since stopped, leaving the streets shimmering under the streetlights. And as we stood together, I realized that curiosity had done more than teach us a lesson. It had led us to something beautiful, something worth holding on to forever. It wasn't just a game anymore. It was a beginning.